have the schema, the model. We have some functions that we are using the model to interact with the database. Let's give some structure to this, right? So one of the best practices, we're going to be applying a couple of best practices. Like for instance, wherever we're going to encapsulate all the code that has to do with interacting with the data model and Mongo, right? We're going to put it under a directory called models, right? And under models, for instance, we're going to declare all the models for users and movies and whatever we want to, very much like we did for Java, right? We kind of created all the packages, right? So same thing here. So we're going to create here a file called user schema.js, right? And what we're going to do in here is that we're going to grab the mongoose. We're going to load that. We need to load the library, and we're going to move the user schema in there. We're going to put the user schema in here. Okay. Now we want the schema to be accessible to the rest of the application, so that the rest of the application could do validation, can create models, maybe can use it as an embedded object in something much bigger. Yes, but we are going to convert this into a reusable entity, right? A reusable artifact. So to do this, we're going to export this module.exports. Exports, right? It's going to be equal to user schema. So module.export is the equivalent, right? Actually, no, there is no equivalent. Well, yeah, I mean, when you're exporting modules from other files, right? Export is a very common keyword, right? And module.export is the mechanism that Node.js implements to declare reusable, self-contained reusable components. Yes? And you can export whatever you want. You can export an object. Here we're exporting an object. Or you can export an entire function, right? And whoever imports this will have access to whatever you export. Make sense? Right? So we have the schema. Let's now create the model. Here's a JavaScript, and we'll call it the user model. Okay, so the user model is going to do something similar. It's going to load Mongoose. It's also going to load the user schema, which lives in the same directory, right? It's going to require. Now here, the file lives in the same file directory. So I need to say /user schema. See that? Right. So that says it's right here. Don't go look for it anywhere else. Right? It's right there. Right. So now that we have the schema, we can now create our model. Right. Here's our model. Copy. And we're going to paste it right here. Our schema. Make sense? All right. Also here in our model, we want to implement. Well, actually, no. We'll do that in a DAO. We'll do that in a DAO, right? We could perhaps implement the create, updates, and deletes here, right? But I think it's better if we do it in a dedicated DAO, right? So let's do that. So we're going to export from here, module.exports, the user model, so that we can reuse it in a DAO, right? So let's do that. So let's create a DAO. And we'll do that in a separate directory. And this will be DAOs. And we'll create our first DAO. We'll call it user DAO. Okay? So our user DAO is going to need the model, right? We just created, right? So we're going to have to load that. So const user model. Require, we're going to have to go up one and then down to models and then down to user model. So we have the model. Yes? Now that we have the model, we would like to implement all the various CRUD operations. Yes? We like to be able to create a user. We like to be able to find all users. We like to be able to find a user by ID. all the CRUD operations that we would expect. Yes. So let's create a couple here. So we'll say const create user will be a function that takes a user object and just creates the user, right? Creates the user. So it's user model.create user. Notice that create is the same function that we've been using in this server. Here's our server, right? User model create, and it takes as argument an object. Yes? It creates an object. If this nomenclature is foreign to you, let me write it in the old user. There we go. Just a function. Just a function. I'm passing the user argument, and it's using user model and creates it, and it's going to return whatever it did. What is it going to return? A promise, which I can then use to do other things, to combine it with other things. Yes. I also have here function find all users. It's going to return user model.find. Yes? There's also a function find user by ID with an ID, and it's going to return user model.find, and then the ID is going to be user ID. So it's going to filter by the ID. Everybody okay? All right, so I need to make this available to the rest of the world. All right, so I need to export something. So module.exports. I'm going to export an object that somebody can then use to refer to these functions right here. Right? So I'm going to export a JSON object whose property is create user, and whose value is a reference to this function, right? And then find all users and find user by ID. Okay? So anybody who's going to import this is going to get this JSON object, and they can use this object to refer to the functions in this file. Make sense? All right. And now that we have that, we can go back to our server. We can go back to our server, import our DAO. Right, so we can say const user DAO, import, start in the DAO, import. Oh, I'm sorry, not import. Sorry, require. Oh, too many languages. Models, not models, DAOs / user DAO. Yes? So now this user DAO is what? It's this object right here. Yeah, so I should be able to just say user DAO dot create user, and I should be able to pass an object. Yes? Right? I shouldn't need any of this. So I'm just going to comment this out. I should be able to just pass here an object, right, and say username. So Frank, first name Frank, last name Herbert. And then here's going to be the object that comes back, right? And who's Frank Herbert? Author of Dune, coming out next year. So we'll do console log author of Dune. Okay. Let's run this, see if it blows up. Okay, there it is. Frank Herbert inserted, right, and it came back right? And we can verify that Frank actually made it into a database. Right? So yeah, we can just keep playing around with this. Author of Doom. We can find all users. Let's see. We do a return user DAO dot find all users. So here's then all the users. And we can do console log all the users, and then maybe we can retrieve a single user. Return user DAO, find user by ID. Let's retrieve Frank. So Frank has this ID. Let's copy that. I can pass in the ID, right? And then spit out Frank and do a console log Frank. Right, so let's try that. Wait, what? No. Oh, did I just stop my database? I did. So, there we go. Run it again. Okay, let's try this again. Stop. Run it. Okay, there it is. There's Frank. There's all my users. I guess I created Frank twice. All right, I've created Frank twice. That's fine. The only thing I'd like to point out is notice that even though I pass the ID of Frank, notice that I pass it as a string. Yep. And the DAO is using find user by ID. This underscore ID is being compared against a string, right? Even though the underscore ID is actually of type object ID, right? So that's one of the layers of abstraction that Mongoose does for you. It does some syntactic sugar and does a conversion for you. Yes. No, that's synchronous. Yep. Yep. Yeah. No. Yep. Yes. Yep.
That also can be passed as a string.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Yes.
What happens if one of the
You get an exception. So there's a the server. You can also have. So this then has two functions. This is the successful function, and then there is an error function. We can do a console the log error or exception, right? So you can handle the exception here, right? There's also here there's an error function here as well, like an overall error for the whole thing that would be called down here. Other things here. So let me instead of a create. Let's start off with just this here. So I'm gonna, let's see. I'm gonna do enter here, and I just wanna copy this. I just want to do this one last one here, this find by ID. I just wanted to just show you. Yeah, I'm gonna comment this out for a second. And this find by ID, so user DAO dot find user by ID, and if you have the ID here, and let's retrieve maybe Charlie Brown here, and say then Charlie console log Charlie. So there's Charlie. But notice that it's coming back as an array. See that? So really the implementation for find by ID, it'd be nice if we would just get that one element, because we know it's a primary key. There's no point in returning an array, right? So for that, we have find one. If we know that this is it's one element, We know it's a primary key, right? We can say, well, if it's more than one, it makes no sense. I just want the first one. Okay. So if we implement that, we run it, we get just one object. Yes, we get one object. But there's an even better one, right? If we are, this is such a common thing to do, compare it against a primary key, that there's a syntactic sugar for this. Find by ID. Find by ID, and you don't have to pass in ID. So I know that I'm going to compare it against the ID, right? And I know there's only one because it's a primary key, right? So if I run that, that still works. Just one element. Yes. Find one might be useful for instance, if I have a function. I'm going to stop using the old syntax. I'm going to use the new syntax. So I'm going to say, const find user by username. I know usernames are unique, and you're going to pass me the username. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to say user model dot find one, and then username equals username. I know it's unique, right? Don't return to me an array, just return that one. Just a word on this syntax. Notice that there's no return, and in ES6, if it's a single line, it has no curly brackets. It's an implied return. So this will return whatever that one line returns. Yes. Again, trying to, a good computer scientist is a lazy computer scientist. So the less we need to type, the better. So there's find user by username, and if we add it to our API here, also again very lazy. There's a syntax where you don't if this left hand side and the right hand side are the same, you don't really need you don't really need both sides, right? This is an implied mapping JSON object, right? All right, there we go. So there's a find user by. Oh, you have to declare the new type. No, I think that works. So we have that, and let's find someone else. We'll say user DAO dot find user by username, and let's return. Who do we have here? Ed. So we say Ed, and then Ed console log Ed. So let's run this. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Okay, it's fine. So there it is. So there's Charlie and there's Ed. Right. So there we have it. So that's just a brief intro to Mongo and MongoDB and Mongoose. There's quite a lot that we haven't covered. I encourage you to explore on your own, play around with it. But most of what we're going to be chatting here or using here in class is either in the slides or what we discussed here today. Okay. All right.